Okay. All right. So in this lecture, we're going to be going over chapter 4 from Madden's Mind, Matter, and Nature, his discussion of materialism. So let's just recap what we've already said about materialism. So as we noted, materialists are naturalists, right? Naturalism is the philosophical view that everything that exists, all facts about the physical world, will have a physical explanation. They will be explained in terms of physical causes. Yeah. Materialists, since they think everything that exists is made of matter, believe that nothing exists which is not physical, and thus all the possible causes of any physical event will be physical causes. Yeah. And materialists hold that all physical properties of material substances are public, that is, they are third person observable, since all things are made of matter, and matter is something that can be observed by us. They hold that there are no such things as private mental states or private minds of the sort that the dualist claims. And last, as we noted last time, materialists are mechanists. Yeah. So they hold, as we see here, that for any event E2 at time n, all the features of E2 are completely explained by some prior event E1 at a prior time. So the current state of the world is completely explained by a previous state of the world, which completely determines, according to the laws of nature, the way things will be now. All right, now there are three basic materialist theories of minds that we're going to be covering here from Madden here. We have eliminative materialism, which denies that consciousness is real at all. Second, logical behaviorism, which reduces mental states to publicly observable actions or behaviors commonly held to be caused by conscious awareness. And the last, identity theory, which is the most popular version. And there are several different varieties of identity theory. We have type theory, token theory, and we're going to have supervenience and functionalism. All right, so let's begin then with eliminative materialism. So before we get into what exactly eliminative materialism holds, we need to make a clarification between the concept of elimination and versus reduction in theories. Yeah. So if you're being reductionist about some phenomenon, yeah, you acknowledge that that phenomenon is real, but by being reductionist about that phenomenon, you're saying this thing that exists really is just something else. Yeah. So, for example, right, we might say, water. If you're going to be a reductionist, and say all that exists are atoms and they're elements, you're going to say, look, there's this substance called water, but all water really is a bunch of H2O molecules, and an H2O molecule really just is nothing more than hydrogen and oxygen atoms. And hydrogen and oxygen atoms really are nothing more than a collection of electrons, protons, and neutrons. Maybe we might say a proton or a neutron really is nothing more than its constituent quarks and gluons and muons and whatnot. So for reductionist, we will say that a seeming whole really is nothing more than the sum of the parts that make it up. Okay, so on this account, you still acknowledge the reality of something, but you say that there is no reality to the whole beyond the sum of the parts. There's nothing more to the whole than just the parts. Eliminativism, by contrast, denies that a particular entity exists at all. Yeah, it exists at all. As such, the limit. If we're eliminativist about something, we're going to say that there can be no truth, no true existential statements about the thing that we deny the existence of, because we say it is not real. So, regarding philosophy of mind, then a reductionist will say mental states are real. There are such things as feeling pain, as seeing the color red, as believing that the Eiffel Tower is in France, but that beliefs, sensations, pain are nothing more than brain activity. There's nothing over and above brain activity. All these is brain activity. So that's reductionism. Eliminativism, on the other hand, says there's no such thing as consciousness at all. There might be brain activity, but there are no actual thoughts, feelings, beliefs, desires, period. Yeah. Although there's brain activity, there is nothing mental about that brain activity. So, having made this distinction, we can see this idea summarized quite nicely by the eliminativist Paul Churchland. Quote, eliminative materialism is the thesis that our common sense conception of psychological phenomena constitutes a radically false theory. A theory so fundamentally defective that both the principles and ontology of that theory will eventually be displaced by completed neuroscience. So the basics of eliminative materialism are as follows. The eliminative materialist's motivation comes from the idea that everything's made of matter. I'm just made of quarks and electrons and whatnot. Yeah. Well, quarks, electrons, protons, neutrons aren't conscious. So if I'm just made up of a bunch of non-conscious matter, then there is actually no such thing as consciousness. So the eliminative materialist says conscious states are not real, because if all that exists is matter and matter is not conscious, then there's no such thing as consciousness in reality. So conscious states are not real. Consequently, all statements about sensations, feelings, thoughts, beliefs, etc., are strictly speaking false. So to say Jack is in pain is false. Rather, we would say Jack's neural network X is activated, or Brendan thinks he's handsome, false. Rather, we would say simply that Brendan's neural network Y is activated. In this case, this is because words like seeing or being in pain, which signify a private, conscious, first-person experience, the eliminative materialist says aren't real. So since these don't refer to anything in reality, statements saying that Jack has a private sensation of pain, or Brendan has a private thought that he is handsome, don't actually exist. What do exist, though, are particular brain activities in Jack and Brendan's neural networks. So the eliminativist argues for this position, right, together with the point that we mentioned before on the idea that ordinary matter, right, the atoms and whatnot aren't conscious, and if you're just made of non-conscious atoms, there's no consciousness in you, since you are just a material thing. But eliminatists argue that the reason why we believe that there are conscious states is because of what they call folk psychology. The idea being that we believe that there are such things as private experiences because we hold that would explain publicly observable behavior. For example, we say, well, why is Martha wincing? Because she's feeling pain, right? If Martha's in pain, right, that explains her wincing. So we would there posit, according to this account of folk psychology, and the term folk here is just kind of a pejorative term meant to describe just kind of a naive, unreflective kind of idea developed without any scientific rigor. So the idea that we would say, well, Martha must be having some feeling of pain in her mind, which explains why she winces, is posited, that feeling pain is posited in order to explain her wincing. Okay, in order to explain her wincing. But the eliminativists claim that there's no reason to posit feelings of pain or mental states like beliefs or whatnot. Insofar as they claim modern neuroscience has replaced folk psychology by providing rigorous scientific explanations that simply don't cite those psychological states. The neuroscientists will talk about brain activations. The neuroscientists won't talk about feelings of pain. So we would say in this case, Martha winced because the neural network in her brain had a P-type activation or whatever the proper term would be. Yeah. So here we explain the observable behavior of wincing, not by citing a psychological state, but simply by citing a physically third-person observable brain event. And if we can give a complete explanation of the wincing without having to appeal to some sort of private conscious state, they hold we have no reason to believe those private mental states actually exist. Now, there are several problems with eliminativism, right? The first I think we would note is that the idea that mind is posited in order to explain behavior. So the eliminativist is saying the reason why we believe pain, sensations, and sensations of red and thoughts and beliefs and desires are real is because we think that we need to posit that the people have consciousness in order to explain their behaviors. However, that's not really the reason why most people think that consciousness is real, right? Rather, I and you right now, right, are directly experiencing, right, mental events, right? I am seeing, I am feeling, I am desiring. I experience my desires. I experience my beliefs. I can reflect on them. I'm aware of the world. So in this way, I don't posit my own consciousness to explain my own physical behaviors. I posit my own consciousness because I have one. Yeah. I don't posit the feelings of pain to explain my own behaviors. I posit feelings of pain because I experience pain. Yeah. So rather than saying that the mental is held to be real because it's a way that we could explain the world, rather we'd say no, the mental is not held to be real in a theoretical way. Right? Like we might posit the existence of dark matter in order to explain certain features of cosmology, even though we don't have no direct evidence that it exists. Rather, we do have direct evidence that the mental exists. It's our own experience of it, in which case the mental is an experiential fact that requires explanation, even if we do explain people's behaviors by citing their mental states. The basis for holding that there are mental states is the fact that we ourselves experience them. Yeah. Secondly, eliminativism seems to be self-contradictory in various ways. Yeah. So the eliminativist asserts the mind does not exist is a true statement, but to assert a proposition is true involves the notions of intentionality and psychology, right? So to assert something is to actually be aware of a proposition, to believe a proposition to be true, to have a mental state of believing. Yeah. But if consciousness doesn't exist, then can the eliminativist consciously believe that the mind does not exist? Seems rather odd, right? Likewise, the idea that a proposition can be true or false, as we went over before, involves the idea of intentionality, the idea that you could have a concept which corresponds to reality or does not. Yeah. Truth is a feature of the representational. But if mind does not exist, there is no such thing as the representational, in which case the theory of eliminativism is not a statement about anything. Yeah. It has no representationality because being representative of something is a feature of the mental. So if the eliminativist says eliminativism is true, they are implicitly contradicting themselves. So with that said, we can move on to the next position, logical behaviorism. Now, logical behaviorism should not be confused with the theory of behavior that was propagated and pioneered by B.F. Skinner. Rather, we use the term logical behaviorism to denote this particular theory of mind that was quite popular in the early to mid 20th century and has since declined. It was championed by Carl Hempel and others among the logical empiricist movement. So behaviorism, unlike eliminativism, is a reductionist theory, whereas the eliminativist says that consciousness does not exist. The behavior says conscious or mental consciousness and mental properties are real, but they're nothing more than external observable behaviors. So in this case, we would say Will is in pain, and the behaviorist analyzes that statement as really meaning Will is moaning and wiggling and suffering a rise in blood pressure following a bodily injury. So the reality of sensations of pain is reduced to just the reality of particular observable behaviors. Being in pain is nothing more than moaning and wiggling and having a rise in blood pressure after a bodily injury. So here, both 1 and 2 will be true according to the behaviorist. But 1 is true only because 1 means the same thing as 2. Yeah. So for the behaviorist and the eliminativist, they both hold that only descriptions of publicly observable external material behaviors are true. The behaviorist differs from the eliminativist by saying we can identify terms like pain with particular behaviors, whereas the eliminativist says, no, the word pain just signifies something wholly mental and unobservable. Yeah. So more examples of this, right? So we would take a mental statement like Martha sees a truck coming. And so the behaviorists would analyze this saying Martha is standing on the sidewalk in the presence of an approaching truck under normal visual conditions, and Martha's eyes are functioning properly, right? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So what does it mean for Martha to see a truck coming? It doesn't mean that Martha has some conscious perception or awareness of a truck approaching her. No, it just means that Martha is in the state that we would normally describe as seeing a truck coming. Yeah, seeing a truck coming. Likewise, we say Will believes it will snow. Well, what kind of behavior would we say believing it will snow would constitute? Well, Will's putting his boots on before leaving the house, and he lives in a cold climate, and it's winter. Yeah, so we reduce belief that it will snow, this intentional state of having belief about the way the world is or will be, to merely a particular action. Yeah. Particular action. Likewise, we say Patrick believes 9 times 9 equals 81. And the real meaning of this would just be Patrick tends to reply yes if you ask him, does 9 times 9 equal 81? All right. So hopefully that's clear enough. The real notion here is that because these behaviors are materialists, right? They don't want to go along with dualism and admit the existence of a non-observable, non-physical mind, but they still want to make sense of our everyday speech of seeing, believing, feeling, desiring, etc. Yeah. So in order to make that notion scientific, right, without giving dualism any credit, they say we can have a scientific study of the mental by treating the mental merely as observable behaviors. Now, the problems with behaviorism, and behaviorism came in for a lot of criticism, such that it's really not held anymore, are numerous. So we're just going to go over a few. So first, right, is that analyzing beliefs as dispositions ultimately leads to a circularity or triviality. So let's assume, right, that Patrick believes 9 times 9 equals 81 just means he tends to answer yes if asked, does 9 times 9 equal 81? But we might say, well, but why? Why does he answer yes when he's asked that 9 times 9 equals 81? Wouldn't we say it's because he believes that that's the answer? Yeah. And if we view number one here as a perfectly reasonable answer, well, in the behaviorist analysis, right, whenever we say Patrick believes 9 times 9 equals 81, we need to replace that with is disposed to answer yes when asked, does 9 times 9 equal 81? In which case we say Patrick's disposed to answer yes when asked, does 9 times 9 equal 81? Because he is disposed to answer yes when asked, does 9 times 9 equal 81? So it ends up being circular. We have no way to explain a dispositional belief in terms of a mental state. And mental states really cannot explain behavior. Yeah. We ultimately just have the fact that Patrick tends to act this way, but there's really no reason to posit anything mental going on. Yeah. Anything mental going on. No reason to say that there's an actual belief there. if a belief is just a disposition, right? Another problem with circularity here, right? Let's assume, right, that Martha sees a truck coming means Martha's standing on the sidewalk in the presence of an approaching truck under normal visual conditions. So we say Martha sees a truck coming because there's a truck coming at her. It's well lit. Her eyes are functioning, right? Her head is turned towards the truck. Yeah. However, why would we assume Martha standing on the sidewalk, right, means that she's aware of the truck? Presumably, we would say, well, maybe we would think she's not aware of the truck if she walks across the street and ends up getting hit by the truck. Yeah. So we would assume, well, that physical behavior is a case of seeing a truck coming only if we assume she also doesn't want to be hit by the truck. Yeah. But how do we know, right? Martha doesn't want to get hit by the truck, right? Because wanting is a mental state. What does not wanting to be hit by a truck look like? We might say not wanting to be hit by a truck looks like Martha standing on the sidewalk in the presence of an approaching truck under normal visual conditions. So then Martha sees a truck coming is identical with Martha doesn't want to get hit by a truck. Yeah. So there doesn't seem to be any way kind of either a separating out separate mental states that we ourselves experience having, right? My perception that the truck is coming is different from my desire not to get hit. Yeah. Although the behavior that might be a sign of both, right? Might be identical. Secondly, if we explain why Martha's staying on the sidewalk is a case of seeing the truck coming, we say it's because she's aware of the truck and she doesn't want to be hit, but that's because she is. Oh, it sounds like it's because she's aware of the truck. Yeah. Why she's standing rather than walking? Because she's standing on the sidewalk. Yeah. Because she's standing on the sidewalk. So we would explain her not walking from the truck in terms of her desire, which just means she's not walking from the truck because she's not walking in front of the truck, yeah? Rather than she's not walking from the truck because she doesn't want to be hit. Further, there's a problem with epiphenomenalism here. So recall, epiphenomenalism is the case or is the term used to describe phenomena which are posited to accompany an event, but which play no causal or explanatory role. So if mental properties don't explain behavior, then they are epiphenomenal. Yeah. And mental properties definitely don't explain behavior if they're identical with the behavior that they are supposed to explain. So we say Patrick is crying because he's in pain. Yeah. That to me sounds like a reasonable explanation, right? But if Patrick is in pain is analyzed just as Patrick is performing certain behaviors that we associate with the word pain, right? Then number one will mean Patrick's crying because Patrick is crying after being injured. Well, that doesn't tell me why he's crying, right? Patrick is crying because Patrick is crying, right? So the pain that Patrick is experiencing doesn't explain his behavior at all, since it's identical with the fact that requires explanation. As such, it seems that if we're going to try to claim there are such things as mental phenomena, we can't identify those phenomena merely with observable behaviors, which are signs of the mental. Because if we reduce the mental to the behaviors that are signs of the mental, we ultimately end up saying nothing and not being able to explain those behaviors. All right, we're now going to move on to the third and the most popular form of materialism, identity theory. Okay. Now, it's going to get a little technical in here, but I think you'll be able to follow along. And if you're not quite sure, right, definitely be sure to go through and reread, right, the chapter very slowly and carefully. It does get a bit technical. All right, so before we get into identity theory, let's talk about different types of identity statements, right? So philosophers distinguish between two types of identity: a priori identities, logical identities, and empirical or a posteriori identity statements. So logical or a priori identity statement, a priori just being Latin for something which is known prior to experience or that doesn't require investigation or to determine the truth of the statement. Venus is Venus. This is self-evident and true by definition. If something is Venus, that thing is Venus, yeah? You can grasp that anything that is Venus without any investigation. It is trivially true, okay? An empirical or a posteriori identity is an identity statement whose truth can only be established by investigation. So, for example, the morning star, which happens to be Venus, is the evening star, which also happens to be Venus. And here, morning star and evening star don't mean the same thing. They have different significations. The morning star refers to the heavenly body that's visible in the morning, and the evening star refers to that bright, shining heavenly body that's visible in the evening. Yeah. So, based off those descriptions alone, planet or heavenly body visible in the morning is the same as the planet or heavenly body visible in the evening. That's not self-evident. Yeah. That's something that we need to discover by investigation. And that's clear because morning star and evening star are different concepts that have different meanings. So it's not obvious that the same planet, Venus, has to have both properties. Even though it does, we only establish that the thing which is the morning star is the same thing that's the evening star based off of an investigation. Now, let's return to the notion of contingent versus necessary identity and apply that to empirical statements, right? So we say a contingent identity is when we describe the same subject by two different properties. So when subject has two different properties, that's contingent. Professor Boyer is Mrs. Boyer's husband. Contingent if we mean the man who is a professor is and called Boyer is also married to a woman called Mrs. Boyer. Yeah. That doesn't have to be the case. I could be a professor without being married, or I could be married without being a professor, or I could be neither, right? A necessary identity statement, though, right, can be found if we simply mean the person who happens to actually be called Professor Boyer is the same person who we happen to call Mrs. Boyer's husband. So here, if we look at number one, the entity that has the properties sufficient to be the morning star also has the properties sufficient to be the evening star. That is completely contingent. It's not necessarily true. If the universe were different, right, in a different possible world, then maybe different planets could play the role of morning star and evening star. Yeah. But number two here, the entity referred to by the name, the morning star, yeah, is identical to the entity that we refer to by the name, the evening star. Now, this is necessary. In any world in which the planet that we call the morning star exists, will be a world in which the planet we call the evening star exists. Yeah. Here, morning star and evening star, rather than describing properties of Venus, just being taken as names for Venus. The thing called Venus is a thing called Venus. So any world in which Venus exists, Venus will exist. In any world in which the thing we call the morning star exists, Venus will exist. In any world in which the entity we call the evening star exists, Venus will exist. Okay. So, having stated that, let's now apply this to a theory of mind. So the materialist identity theory holds that statements 1 and 2 here are descriptions of the same event. So we say Patrick sees red, and Patrick has a particular seeing neural network activation in his brain. And the identity theorist says seeing red is nothing more than a particular neural activation of Patrick's brain. Okay. So they're going to hold that seeing red, a mental property, and a C neural activation in the brain, a physical property, are one and the same thing. Yeah. These are two ways to describe or name the same reality. So here we have a quote from J.C.C. Smart, who's an identity theorist. Sensations are nothing over and above brain processes. Nations are nothing over and above citizens. But this does not prevent the logic of nation statements being very different from the logic of citizen statements. The notion of what Smart's getting at here is as follows, yeah? Is America something real? Yes. But is America anything over and above the citizens that make up the United States? If everybody in the United States, yeah, left the United States and became citizens of other countries, would the United States still exist in any real sense? Would seem not, yeah? So in that case, we could say America is nothing but the citizens that make up the country. However, even if America is reducible to these individuals, the idea of America, yeah, would not necessarily, the concept of America needn't be the same as the concept Boyer and Jones and Smith, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. It needn't be merely a list of the individuals. Yeah. What is true of America needn't necessarily be something that is true of this group of individuals considered as individuals. So we can describe the same group in two ways. We can describe it as a sovereign entity, or we can describe it as a group of people. Yeah. A group of people. So Smart's idea here is that sensations or mental states are the same as brain processes, but what is true of a sensation is not necessarily true of a brain process, in the sense that it's a different way of conceiving or describing a brain process. So the logic, right, or the way that we talk about sensations might be different from the way we talk about brain processes, even though they're identical entities in reality, because they're different concepts. Yeah. They have different meanings. There are two ways of conceiving or of talking about the same reality. So, in this way, the identity theorist says the mental and the physical are really just the same, but they have different concepts such that we don't have to merely be speaking about physically observable behaviors. We can still preserve our normal way of speaking about the mental. And so the way that Smart argues that sensations and mental states are just brain activities involves using a topically neutral description of a mental event. So what is a topically neutral description? It's a way of describing something or an event in a way that doesn't tell you anything about the properties that belong to it or that are true of it, right? So let's say you get a phone call from your dentist and your dentist says, "Hey, it's your dentist." Well, you know that the person calling you is a dentist, yeah? You know this person has this property of dentist. So you know my dentist is calling me, yeah? And maybe you learn later that your dentist plays soccer, right? So you now know that the identity statement, the dentist is the soccer player, is true. And this would be an empirical identity statement. You did not know, for example, right, that the person you saw playing soccer was your dentist, yeah? And you didn't know that your dentist was the person playing soccer, but you learned this later, okay? But let's say you get a phone call and the caller doesn't tell you who he is. All you'll know is somebody called. You don't know what properties that caller has. You don't know, you can't describe the caller in terms of their properties of being a dentist or being a soccer player or whatever. So here we would say that the dentist call describes the caller according to a particular property. It is not topically neutral. It describes the dentist or the caller with respect to a certain attribute he has. Somebody called does not describe any properties of the caller. It just tells you that there's an entity who called you. Yeah. In this way, it's topically neutral. It does not commit to any facts about the caller other than that this individual is a caller. So let's say that somebody called. Yeah. There you have two hypotheses. Obviously, I misspelled hypotheses here. Let's say somebody calls you and they don't tell you who, right? Or you see the number and you don't pick up the call, but you think, okay, that was either the dentist or the veterinarian who called, yeah. And then you figure out based off empirical reasons that the dentist called, yeah. You might say, well, look, the veteran never calls on Tuesday. It's Tuesday, so whoever called must be the dentist. So you now have gone from a topically neutral description of the caller. I know that there is somebody who called me. Somebody who called me exists. And then you deduce what is true about that person who called you. The caller is a dentist, yeah? So you know the caller's a dentist, but that's all you can know about the caller. You have no reason to believe that the dentist might have some additional properties. You might say, the person who called me is my dentist and also plays soccer. Now, it might be true that this individual has some additional property of playing soccer, but you have no basis for maintaining that, yeah? So the idea then is if we begin with a topically neutral description of the entity that we're investigating, we should only affirm of that entity what we're able to empirically discover about it. And we should not attribute to that entity any other properties that we don't have an empirical basis to hold it possesses. So applying this now to the mental. So the identity theory argument goes something like this. Let's take the case of seeing red. Patrick sees red. Let's give a topically neutral statement, right? So the materialist says Patrick sees red is just brain activity, yeah? And the dualist says Patrick sees red is a private, publicly inaccessible, mental, non-physical experience in Patrick's immaterial mind, right? So what does Patrick seeing red really involve? Well, rather than arguing whether there are non-physical mental states like the dualists hold, or whether it's just brain activity like the materialists hold, Smart says, look, let's just begin with the description of seeing red that everyone can agree on, yeah? Patrick sees red means that Patrick is in a particular state, we'll call it S, that occurs when a red object is present to him under normal visual conditions and he's awake, yeah? So whatever's going on with Patrick seeing red, it's something that occurs under these conditions, yeah? So seeing red is some state in Patrick that occurs under these conditions. So we then can ask, is this state simply a type of brain activity? Or is it some private non-physical state in Patrick's mind, as the dualist maintains? Now, let's say that we investigate this empirically using functional MRI equipment. We discover that that state S, right, involves an R-type neural activation in his brain. We now have an empirical reason to say Patrick sees red means that Patrick has a neural activation in his brain of a particular type. Now, do we now have given that we've established this, should we also say that, well, in addition to that brain activity, there's also some non-physical private experience, yeah, over and above the brain activity? Do we have any empirical reasons to assume, like the dualist does, that this state of seeing red involves, or this event, seeing red, involves both a physical activity and a spiritual or immaterial mental state? No, we have no empirical reason to suppose this. Yeah, there might be philosophical reasons, but we have no empirical reasons. Yeah, and if we have no empirical reasons, then Smart concludes, well, since we have no reasons to think that there's anything going on in seeing red beyond the particular brain activity in Patrick's brain that we observe, we'll say that the state of seeing red simply is having this type of neural activation in the brain. Therefore, seeing red simply means, or does not involve anything above and beyond having this kind of brain activity. So to summarize, right, we would say identity theory argues that whenever a psychological state is present, all we have reason to believe it involves is a physical brain state. So psychological states are reduced to physical states. Thinking and feeling are just brain activity, yeah, are just brain activity. Now, this contrasts with the eliminativist theory earlier, because identity theory, he is not denying the existence of psychological states. It's just saying that psychological is nothing more than the physical, yeah, is nothing more than the physical. All right, I'm going to pause for 1 second here and just see me vaping. All right, so we're resuming. Okay, so let's get now into the different ways that this identity theory is cashed out, right, to use an analytic phrase. The different ways that this is applied. So we have two types of identity theories: token identity theories and type identity theories. So the type identity theory, to understand the difference here, let's distinguish between these technical terms of type and token. Type just means a kind, yeah? So type just refers to a kind of thing, right? Or a genus or species. So a human being is a type of animal, yeah? A ball is a type of human artifact, right? And token just means a particular instance of a type. So Tom and Socrates are token instances of the type human. A soccer ball and a baseball are token instances of the type ball, yeah? So a type identity theory claims that each type of psychological state, pain, seeing red, it's raining, etc., are identical with different types of neural activities. So we're going to say, so that would mean that every instance of seeing red is an instance of a particular generic type of neural activation. Every particular instance of pain is identical with a particular type of neural activation. So being in pain is a C neural activation, such that anyone who has a C neural activation, a particular arrangement of neural activations in their brain, we will say they are in pain. And if they don't have that particular form of neural network activation in their brain, we would say that person is not in pain. So here, this would be saying the feelings of pain, the feeling pain I have and the feeling pain that you have, right? If we both stub our toe, right, will be the same type of pain. Well, then we have to have the same type of brain activation, yeah? And so that's identical pain that we are both feeling is nothing more than identical brain activity in both your brain and mind. Now, there's an issue with type identity theory here, which is that your brain might not be wired exactly the same as mine. So if we have different brain wiring, I'm sorry, this is inaccurate. Token identity theory holds. No, that is type identity theory that holds 1. So type identity theory says for every psychological state type P, there's a single neurophysiological state type B, such that every token of P is a token of B, and every token of B is a token of P. So we can just say for the psychological state pain, there's a single type of brain activation, such that every time there's pain, there'll be that particular kind of brain activity, and wherever there's that kind of brain activity, we say that that's an instance of feeling pain. But different people have slightly different brain wiring. Yeah, your brain might not quite, when you experience pain, as mine does. Yeah. So does that mean that if you don't have the same neural activation as I do with the same exact pattern, that you don't feel pain when your toes stubbed? You have a brain activation that's similar, but not the same. Likewise, other animals with different brain sizes and different brain structures presumably can hear the same sounds we do, but they don't have the same types of brain activations, right? Their brains are wired differently, right, or shaped differently. So are we to say that, that other animals don't see colors or that they don't hear sounds because their brains don't light up in the same way a human's does? Or are we to say that they have a completely different kind of experience? Or do you want to say that they have the same kind of sensory experiences as we do? If we go with type identity theory, then it seems that we are forced to say that only human beings are conscious, or only particular human beings who have this particular type of brain activation are conscious. Whereas obviously the empirical data tells us a lot of different things are conscious. A lot of different things have sensations. A lot of different things have desires. Yeah. So the way to avoid this is token theory, right? And so here we have this quote from Cyril, right? In any case, the idea that any type of mental state is identical with some type of neurophysiological state seemed really much too strong. But it seemed that the underlying philosophical motivation of materialism could be preserved with a much weaker thesis. The thesis that for every token instance of mental state, there will be some token neurophysiological event with which that token instance is identical. Such views were called the token identity theories. They soon replaced the type identity theories. So the token identity theory holds the following. We will define types both of types of mental states by the various token instances. So to define a type by token instances would be a case where we say like an athlete, right? Is there one feature that all athletes have in common? Maybe not, right? It might be harder to actually identify one feature that is significantly present in every instance of an athlete than you think. So we might say, well, look, an athlete is defined by the different instances it's found. So an athlete is someone who plays baseball or basketball or football or runs track or bowls, or you see how we go on and on, right? So we would say that there's no one single feature that all the token instances have in common, in virtue of which they belong to the single type. But nevertheless, every instance of a baseball player is an instance of an athlete. Every instance of a basketball player is an instance of an athlete. Every instance of a football player is an instance of an athlete. And whatever is true of athletes in general will be true of baseball and basketball and football and soccer, et cetera, players, yeah? So then, for every token of a certain type of psychological state, that just means every instance of pain, right? There will be some token, there'll be some instance of some type of physical state or other to which that psychological state token is identical. So we would say, in any instance of pain is going to be an instance of a C neural activation or a D neural activation or an E neural activation. That is, we observe someone is in pain and we see that they have a C neural activation pattern. And we observe someone else who is in pain and they have a D neural activation pattern. We see someone else who's in pain and they have an E neural activation pattern. We'll say, well, pain is either a C neural activation or a D neural activation or an E neural activation. All these different types of neural activations are all equally instances of pain. Yeah, are all instances of pain. Now, this is held to be a non-reductive theory. It is reductionist in the sense that, as we were talking about earlier, it's saying that there is no such thing as the mental distinct from the physical, right? So the token identity theory does hold, yeah, that there is no such thing as a mind over and above brain activity. But it is non-reductive in a different sense, in the sense that it's not claiming that all mental activity can be fully explained by citing more fundamental laws governing, say, quantum mechanics or governing neuron activity, right? Biochemistry. And that's because if there's no single type of brain activity common to all token instances of feeling pain or seeing red, then explanations of feeling pain or seeing red can't be explained reductionistically using a uniform set of more fundamental physical laws. So if all feelings of pain are just one particular type of brain activity, and we can explain that particular type of brain activity in terms of biochemistry, then we can say, feeling pain really can be just reduced to an explanation of pain can really just be reduced to this more basic biochemical explanation. Yeah. But if the biochemistry going on when I feel pain and the biochemistry going on when you feel pain aren't the same, then there is no single set of laws that can explain all instances of pain. There's no single more fundamental set of laws that explain all pain. Yeah. We have to kind of give different explanations in each case. Now, this leads to a possible problem for the materialist. Yeah. If there's no uniform physical feature common to every instance of seeing red, but these are all instances of seeing red. Yeah. Right. If there's nothing physically common to every instance of feeling pain, but every instance of feeling pain is a genuine experience of pain, then it seems like we have something common to all instances of pain, distinct from the material features of those sensations. Yeah. It sounds kind of like property dualism. The property dualist would say, when I feel pain, there's some brain activity. And in addition, there's a non-physical conscious state of pain in my mind. And when you feel pain, there's a different set of physical activities in your brain. And over and above that, there's something that you have in your mind, a conscious sensation of pain, which is identical in kind with mine. It's just the same as my pain. Yeah. So our pain is the same in kind, even though our brain activity might be a little different. So if this is the case, right? If this is the case, since it seems every instance of seeing red, if I look at a red pen and you look at a red pen, right, and we both see the same color, but my brain activity is a little different than yours, wouldn't we say that, well, there's something that's exactly identical between your experience of red and mine? So, that would seem to possibly correspond to a non-physical conscious state, a non-physical property, like some dualists argue, yeah? So why shouldn't we just say seeing red is a non-physical property, yeah? Doesn't the token approach ultimately lead to dualism, embrace dualism? Well, possibly not, because the non-reductive materialists have a response. So here we have a quote from Andrew Melnick. The rub, however, is that the event identity or token identity claim tells us nothing about the relations between the single events having the mental property that it has and it's having the physical property it has, a fortiori, by the force of the argument. Yeah, the event identity, it just means token identity here, claim yields no sense in which the property that it has is nothing over and above it's having the physical property it has. So this is the challenge. Yeah. So the solution to this problem that identity theorists propose is the idea of supervenience. So supervenience is the idea that a particular property or concept supervenes, or it's instantiated. It's instantiated by a wide range of individuals which don't share any particular identical features, but that the property nonetheless is reducible to the particular features of the instances which we call instances of the property, right? So let's say the property P supervenes over A, B, and C. A, B, and C would all be instances of P, even if A, B, and C don't have a set of completely identical features. So being P will always be, every P is either an A or a B or a C, and that's how P exists. But there might still be certain things that are true of A, B, and C as P's, even though they don't have any identical features. Okay. So being P is equivalent to having the features of A or of B or of C. So P cannot exist without A, B, or C, such that it's not a distinct thing over and above A, B, or C. So the example that Madden gives to illustrate this is, let's say that you and I are making drawings, yeah, or statues of Albus Dumbledore from Harry Potter, right? And you make one in marble, right? And let's say you're a good sculptor, and yours looks very realistic, and I make one in clay, and mine is really, really crummy. Well, we could say both are genuine instances of a statue of Albus Dumbledore, even though they don't really have anything in common, right? They don't have any physical features in common. Maybe the beard that you make, right? The shape of the beard on yours is far more realistic than the shape of the beard on mine. I just put a little blob there, right? A little blob of clay for a beard, and you actually, have a carving. It looks like hair. Yeah. And my statue of Dumbledore, because I'm not very good at doing things, I just put a little triangle, a little cone on top of the head, and I say, "Oh, this is Dumbledore wearing a party hat." And you do it actually like in the movie, where he's got that little cap, little tassel or something. There might not be any particular physical shape features that yours has in common with mine, but we would say, well, these are both meant to be statues of Dumbledore, so these are both statues of Dumbledore. Well, what do they have in common physically? Nothing, but nevertheless, if they're both statues of Dumbledore, there is no physical properties of being a statue of Dumbledore that are shared and that need to be shared in common for both to be statues of Dumbledore. Yeah. That both can be a statue of Dumbledore, even though they might not have any direct physical commonalities that are identical in both cases. So a property can be instantiated by radically different things and be meaningfully said to be instantiated by radically different things, even though those different things might not have any physical similarities. But nevertheless, certain things will be true of both statues. Yeah. Say, this is a statue of Harry Potter's mentor. This is a statue of the character who's killed by Snape in book 6 of Harry Potter. Spoiler alert. Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There will be still certain facts that are true about every single instance, even though they don't share any physical features in common that ground those common facts. So the idea then of psychophysical supervenience, when we apply this to the mental, is as follows. If a subject, S, has a psychological property, M, so plug in feeling pain, seeing red, believing that the Saints are going to win the Super Bowl this year, doubting the Saints are going to win the Super Bowl this year, being afraid that the Saints are going to lose the Super Bowl this year, plug in whatever you want for M. Yeah. Then this subject, S, will also have a physical property, P. And any S that has this physical property must have the psychological property, M. Yeah. So we can therefore say, if you have the same physical property as me, and I report being in pain, then we'll say, if you have the same exact physical property as me, you're in pain. And if you report being in pain, you're going to have some physical property. Your brain activity might be different than mine, but anyone who has the same brain activity as you do, when you feel pain, we will say that person is in pain, even if you and that other person's physical properties aren't the same as mine. We will all three be suffering pain. Now, this account of supervenience leads us to the question of, well, look, if there's nothing that's exactly the same physically for every instance of seeing red or every instance of pain, the supervenience talk might be a clever way to kind of say, well, look, pain simply is just these different types of physical brain activations. Yeah. But how are we to identify which physical properties are to be identified as feelings of pain, and which physical brain states are identified as seeing red, and which physical states are identified as believing that the Mona Lisa is the greatest painting in the world, and which physical properties are identified with, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. How can we distinguish? Yeah. How can we identify whether or not, right, something which has a particular physical state also has a mental state? Yeah. That it has a mind, right, in this physical sense. This leads to the doctrine of functionalism, which will lead us briefly to talk about artificial intelligence. So how does the mental supervene on the physical? Yeah. How can we identify whether or not the mental is supervening on a particular physical state? So the solution then here is to say if there's no common physical set of features, they're shared by all mental states, which are really just physical states. How do we identify which physical states are instances of mental states? Functionalism says that a mental state supervenes on a physical state. That is, a particular brain activity is an instance of consciousness if that brain activity has the same causes as the mental state and can be substituted for the mental state in explaining behavior. So if P has the same inputs as M, yeah, and causes the same outputs as M, so it performs the same function or role that the mental is held to play, then we'll say that physical state is an instance of that mental type. So take this for example, right? Brendan believes the stove is hot. So we're going to say, well, what's going on? So Brendan says, I think the stove is hot. So we say, well, Brendan is in an R neural network activation, and that particular R neural network activation was caused by the heat stimulus from the stove. And that brain state caused by the stimulus from the stove, along with a desire not to be burned, causes him to pull his hand back. Yeah. So we say, Brendan believes the stove is hot, and that's why he pulled his hand away from the stove. And the identity theory says, well, look, how do we know which brain activity is Brendan's belief the stove is hot? Well, we'll say, well, we would say that Brendan's belief the stove is hot was caused by his sensing the stove was hot. Well, what's the brain activity that was caused by the sense stimulus from the heat of the stove? Oh, the R neural network activation was caused by the heat stimulus. Well, so was Brendan's belief the stove is hot. That came from the heat stimulus. Since it seems that the R neural network activation was caused by the heat stimulus, and we say that his belief was caused by the heat stimulus, the R neural network activation is likely to be what his belief the stove is hot is. But Brendan's belief the stove is hot also generates, so it has the same input, yeah, as the R neural network activation. But Brendan's belief that the stove is hot explains why he retracts his hand from the stove, because he doesn't want to. Why? Because he doesn't want to get burned. So he believes the stove is hot. He doesn't want to get burned. So if we can identify that the R neural network activation, together with the desire not to be burned, a particular other neural activation, leads to him retracting his hand, then the R neural network activation, because it has the same inputs and outputs, it's caused by the heat stimulus, and it causes him to retract his hand, then that neural activation must be what the belief the stove is hot is. Kermit the Frog, on the other hand, believes the stove is hot. Now, Kermit has a different brain than Brendan, yeah? And we don't mean like the Muppet who has no brain, obviously. But let's say there's a frog named Kermit, yeah? We say, I think the frog believes the stove is hot. How do we know the frog has that belief? Well, we say that the frog has a particular different kind of neural network activation, which was caused by the heat stimulus. Well, all beliefs that stoves are hot are caused by heat stimuli. So if we can identify the state caused by the heat stimulus, yeah, and we also say, and this activation caused by the heat stimulus then caused a second reaction in his brain that led Kermit to retract its leg from the stove. Well, the belief that the stove is hot is why the frog took its foot away from the stove. Since this neural activation is performing the same causal role, it has the same cause and the same effects as the mental belief, we're going to say that different type of neural activation, because it plays the same role as the belief, must be what the belief physically is in Kermit. So we don't have the same type of physical brain activity. One's an R neural, the other is an F neural network activation. But because both play the same role as a belief that the stove is hot, the token identity theorist says, well, since they both play the same function that belief that the stove is hot plays, these are both genuine instances of the mental state of believing the stove is hot. So, so we can kind of sum this up as follows, right? Brendan's state of being in a state of Q neural activation, which is equivalent to perception the stove is hot, both of which are caused by a heat stimulus from the stove. Both cause him to be in a state of R neural activation. Yeah. That is a state of believing the stove is hot. That, along with a prior desire not to get burned, which we would identify with a T neural activation, causes hand to recoil. So the statement on the right, we would say the perception that the stove is hot plays a particular function. It's caused by the heat stimulus, and it produces a belief. Oh, the Q neural activation is caused by the stimulus and causes something else. What does it cause? An R neural activation, which seems to have the same cause as the belief the stove is hot. So we identify the R neural activation with the belief the stove is hot. And both of those together with the desire not to get burned, which we, through another set of empirical testing, somehow identify with a different prior T neural activation, jointly cause the hand to recoil. Since we see the R neural activation has the same causes and same effects as the mental states, we'll say that R neural activation is a genuine instance of believing the stove is hot because it has the same inputs and outputs as the belief. And since it has the same causes and effects as the belief does, it must be what the belief is. Okay. So does a particular physical state, that is a particular physical state of brain, a particular mental thing? We say, well, does it have the causes that we would normally associate with a mental state? Does it have the effects that we normally associate with a mental state? If so, it is that mental state. So the psychological state is not, in this case, the behavior, but something that plays a role internal to the organism, linking stimuli to behavioral responses. In this, the functionalist differs from the behaviorist. Yeah. Here, seeing a truck is not standing on the road in normal visual conditions and not walking from the truck. No, rather, it's something that causes the behavior. Yeah. It links the stimuli to the behavioral responses. It plays a function of translating between input and output. Now note one thing before we move on. If functionalism needn't be a materialist theory alone, yeah, we could say that non-physical state, yeah, that arises based off of a stimulus and that leads to a response would be defined functionally as a state of pain. So we might say, look, if there are the causes of pain, if the causes of pain apply to a frog, and the behavior that's explained by pain also is seen to be performed by the frog, we would say, I assume the frog has a pain state. That needn't mean that the frog's pain is merely a brain activity, but it would imply that the frog has a mental state, yeah, a consciousness of pain, which could be non-physical, yeah. Here we identify something as having a mental state. If we see, given the same inputs and outputs, it appears that it has the same thing linking them. Yeah, if there's something linking them, we're going to assume it has the equivalent type of mental state. Now, functionalism is true, though, for the materialist, that any subject in any physical state with the same inputs as a mental state, which cause the same effects as that mental state, will have to be called conscious, including computers. So, for example, right, we say you are conscious of the temperature of the room, yeah, and so you feel the room is too hot, yeah, right. You feel the room is 77 degrees, right, and that awareness that the room is warm is caused by a heat stimulus, yeah, and that awareness of the temperature of the room caused by heat stimulus, along with your prior desire to keep the temperature below 75 degrees, is a cause of you turning the AC on and lowering the temperature, yeah? But if you got a smart thermostat, it will have a particular physical state, which is provoked by heat stimulus. It registers a certain temperature, yeah? And that has the same cause as your belief or your awareness of the temperature of the room. And this awareness, or this physical state caused by the heat stimulus, along with a prior setting to keep the room below 77 degrees Fahrenheit, causes the AC to turn on, yeah? So in this case, The smart thermostat has a physical state that's playing the same role as your conscious awareness of the temperature of the room. And if a mental state is simply, if awareness of the temperature of the room is simply a physical state that's caused by a heat stimulus and that produces a chain that leads to turning on the AC, and the smart thermostat has a physical state that performs the same role as your awareness, according to functionalism, we would have to say that, strictly speaking, that thermostat is conscious in some way. It has a awareness in some way. All right, pausing for a second here. Boop, boop, boop. So this then leads us to the idea of the Turing test. So Alan Turing, famous English mathematician and computer scientist, they made a movie about him called The Imitation Game, starring Benedict Cumberbatch, and the breaking of the Nazi Enigma machine code. Alan Turing had his famous test for artificial intelligence. He says a system is surely intelligent, it can carry on an ordinary conversation like an ordinary person. So the idea of the Turing test is as follows. Let's say you're in two text chats, one with the real person A, one with a computer who we'll call B. Yeah. You're not told which is the person, which is the computer, and you input the same text prompts in both chats. And if the output that A gives is indistinguishable from those that the computer gives, then Turing argued we would have to say the computer has actual intelligence. If the computer can function in the same way as a human being does, if a computer can give the same outputs, if it can simulate intelligence, then he says it must actually be intelligent. All right, it must actually be intelligent. Now we'll get into some arguments against this theory in the next lecture, but just let's just reflect on this for a moment, right? And how this fits in with functionalism. Yeah. So if a computer has processes in its CPU that perform the same role as brain processes in your brain, yeah, and we assume consciousness is just a physical brain process. What reason do we have to? What reason would we have for denying the computer is intelligent if consciousness is simply a physical process that performs a certain role, that plays a certain function? If a computer has the same inputs and outputs as us, then wouldn't we say it's conscious? Because remember, according to the token theory, yeah, the type of physical process needn't be identical. Yeah. My brain process is in an organic brain, right? An organic matter, involves neurons firing. The computer's processing, right, is in a silicone chip. And yet both, we would have to say, if they perform the same function, would, on the token theory, be equivalent. Thus, we would have to say the computer is conscious, although in a slightly different physical way than I am, but nonetheless, it would seem to have real consciousness, just like I do, if we go with the physicalist theory. Okay. So that's about it for today. We will be talking more about AI and the and debates about whether or not computers are conscious in the next lecture. So